Hello, church. It's Pastor Mike. Our devotion this Tuesday, as we're heading to Easter, I think is a reason to stop and to think about what Easter means to us, what our faith means to us, who God is to each one of us. I think for many of us, our faith is something that we look to God and we worship God because of God's power. We worship because of God's greatness, because of God's goodness. And often we can think of that power in terms of either wisdom, that God knows best, God knows better than we do, God has a plan, God has a purpose, this wisdom of God, or the power of God, the ability, the might, the strength of God to overcome death, to overcome darkness, to overcome sickness, to overcome all things that are evil. And we can yearn after who God is because we can paint God in our head as this almighty superhero, just like we might see on a TV show or in a comic book. Somebody who's going to know the right answers, who's going to beat up the bad guys, who's going to let us experience victory with him as he wins against the cosmic forces of evil. But think about what Easter really is. Easter is the culmination of God's willingness to die on our behalf. It's not particularly wise to do, to choose death, and it's certainly not a show of strength in order to be killed by others, be killed by your own creation. But in this one moment that's coming up this week, God's ultimate mighty power, God's full understanding, full being, full personhood is expressed not in a lecture where Jesus shows everyone who's against him how they are wrong and makes them all look like fools. And it's not shown in the majesty of God's power where he might wipe away all the people that were conspiring against him and have this ultimate victory. God's power is shown in that he was willing to die for us, and that he willingly took on death, a death that he did not deserve, so that we might be made whole in our relationship with God. God's greatest moment of all, where we can see the true revealed nature of God's heart, is ultimately one of humility and one of love. To love us so much that God loves us more than his own pride in this moment, is willing to be humiliated in front of his creation in order that we might find the solution, that we might be saved from that very instinct within us to humiliate others and to humiliate God. That is what Easter is about. This recognition that when God had to, in one moment in history, define who God was, he said, "It will be love and humility which define me." Paul understood this in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 when he's writing to this church, a church that is dealing with issues of pride and dealing with issues of hierarchy, who's better than everyone else in church. He reminds them about what the cross means, and he says that God chose what is foolish in order to shame the wise, and he chose what was weak in order to shame the strong, that God chose what was low and despised in the world, the things that were considered nothing, in order to reduce to nothing the things that are. God came in all the ways that we would define as weakness to show us that it's not our own strength or even God's strength that saves the world, but it is his love and his willingness to give everything for those he loves. That's what saves. That's the power of God that we worship. So this week, think about that and try to be that in your own life. So often we can get caught up in power worship and just want to be strong like God, wise like God, do great things like God. But are we as eager to say, I want to love like God, I want to sacrifice like God, I want to give up everything for other people, just like God did? It'd be pretty amazing if our world had more people like that. And I pray that with God's leading, we will. And I pray it'll start with you and with me being those kind of people in God's kingdom, loving others with his heart and with his full and reckless abandon. So God bless you today and have a wonderful day and week leading up to this Easter Sunday.